The mountain wind howled through the pines as Sarah Roberts pressed her back against the rough cabin wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the gap in the wooden shutters, she could see the torches bobbing in the darkness below, their orange flames casting dancing shadows across the snow. "We know you're up there, woman," came the gravelly shout of Marcus Webb, the town's most ruthless debt collector. "Your husband's debts don't die with him. Time to pay up or face the consequences." Sarah's trembling fingers clutched the worn shawl around her shoulders. 3 months had passed since the consumption took her beloved James, leaving her alone in this remote cabin with nothing but memories and mounting bills she could never hope to pay. The general store owner, the doctor, even the preacher, they all wanted their money. Money she didn't have. The sound of boots on the wooden porch made her breath catch. They had found her hiding place. There was nowhere left to run. But then, cutting through the night air like a blade, came a voice she had never heard before. Deep, steady, and utterly unafraid. "That's far enough, gentlemen." Sarah crept to the window and peered through the shutters. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight, blocking the path to her cabin. Even in the darkness, she could see the breadth of his shoulders, the confident way he held himself. "This ain't your business, stranger," Webb snarled, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "The woman owes money and we aim to collect." "I'm making it my business," the stranger replied, his voice carrying quiet authority. "And I suggest you reconsider your approach. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." The confrontation below continued, but Sarah found herself studying the mysterious defender. Who was he? Why was he risking his safety for a woman he had never met? "You don't understand," Webb continued, his voice rising. "This woman's husband borrowed from half the town before he died. Someone's got to pay." "And someone will," the stranger said calmly, "but not tonight and not like this." The sound of steel sliding against leather filled the air. The torches below wavered as the men holding them took involuntary steps backward. "We'll be back," Webb threatened, but his voice lacked conviction. "This ain't over." "No," the stranger agreed quietly. "It isn't." Sarah watched as the men retreated down the mountain, their torches disappearing into the darkness. Only then did she allow herself to breathe normally. But her relief was tempered by new anxiety. The stranger remained, and she had no idea what he wanted. Minutes passed in silence. Eventually his voice drifted up to her window, gentle now. "Ma'am, I know you're in there. Those men are gone, but they'll be back. We need to talk." Something in his voice made her believe he truly meant her no harm. After several minutes of internal debate, she slowly unlatched the door and opened it just wide enough to peer out. The man standing on her porch was not what she had expected. Yes, he was tall and broad-shouldered, but his face held a kindness that surprised her. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes seemed to hold depths of understanding. "My name is Roy Thompson," he said quietly, removing his hat. "I heard about your situation in town." "I don't have any money," Sarah said quickly. "If that's what you're after, you'll be disappointed." Roy shook his head. "I'm not after your money, ma'am. I'm here because I think we might be able to help each other." "I don't understand." "May I come in? It's a conversation better had by the fire than on a frozen porch." Every instinct told Sarah to refuse, but something about Roy Thompson's manner made her feel safer than she had in months. Slowly, she stepped back and allowed him to enter. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. Roy's eyes took in the details: the carefully mended curtains, the swept hearth, the small touches that spoke of a woman who took pride in her surroundings. "You keep a fine home," he said, settling into the chair she indicated. "Thank you." Sarah remained standing, arms wrapped around herself defensively. "You said we might help each other. I'm not sure what you mean." Roy was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that made Sarah understand she was about to hear something deeply personal. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. Fever took her, same as it took our youngest boy. Left me with 5 children to raise on my own." He looked up at her then, and she saw the pain he carried. "They're good children, but they need more than I can give them. They need a mother's touch, a woman's wisdom." Sarah felt her heart constrict. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't see how that concerns me. Those men who were here tonight, they'll be back. You need protection, a way to pay those debts, and my children, they need a mother. Roy's eyes met hers directly. I'm proposing marriage, ma'am, a practical arrangement that would benefit us both. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marriage to a complete stranger. The very idea seemed impossible, but another part of her was already calculating the possibilities. Protection from her creditors. A home. A purpose. You don't know anything about me, she said finally. I know you're a widow facing circumstances beyond your control. I know you keep a clean home and that you've been faithful to your husband's memory. I know you're brave enough to face those debt collectors alone. Roy's voice was steady. That's enough for me to know you'd be good for my children. Sarah turned away, staring out the window at the moonlit landscape. The mountains that had seemed like a prison now looked different somehow. I can't have children of my own, she said quietly. The doctor made that clear years ago. If you're looking for a wife to give you more sons and daughters, you should look elsewhere. Roy's response surprised her with its gentleness. I already have 6 children, ma'am. What I need is someone to help me raise the ones I've got. 6 children. Sarah's mind reeled. She had dreamed of having just one child, had prayed for it every night during her marriage to James. Where are they now, she asked. At my place, about 10 miles north. My oldest boy, Kenneth, he's 15 and does his best to help with the younger ones, but it's not the same as having a mother. I need time to think, she said finally. Roy nodded, rising from his chair. Of course, it's not a decision to be made lightly. He moved toward the door, then paused. But don't take too long, ma'am. Those men will be back, and when they come, they won't be interested in conversation. After he left, Sarah sat by the dying fire, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. Marriage to a stranger. Motherhood to children she had never met. A complete upheaval of everything she had known. But what life did she have now? What future awaited her if she remained alone? The next morning brought fresh snow and clarity. Sarah packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag and locked the cabin door behind her. She had made her decision. The journey to Roy Thompson's homestead took her through beautiful country. Snow-covered peaks reached toward a brilliant blue sky, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines. It was harsh land, unforgiving to those who weren't prepared, but there was majesty that took her breath away. Roy's cabin was larger than her own, built of solid logs and chinked against the mountain winters. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could hear voices from within. Children's voices, raised in what sounded like an argument. Sarah's steps slowed. What if they didn't accept her? What if she couldn't love them as they deserved? Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a tall, lanky boy with Roy's dark hair and serious eyes. This had to be Kenneth. You must be Mrs. Roberts, he said with formality that seemed too old for his years. Pa's been expecting you. Sarah nodded, suddenly tongue-tied. Behind Kenneth, she could see other faces peering at her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. A girl of perhaps 12 with braided hair and a stubborn set to her chin. 2 younger boys who looked to be twins. And in the background, barely visible, a small girl who couldn't have been more than 5. Come in, Kenneth continued, stepping aside. Pa's out checking the traps, but he'll be back soon. The interior was warm and lived in, but Sarah could see the signs of a household without a woman's touch. Clothes that needed mending piled in a corner. Dishes stacked haphazardly on shelves. The general air of organized chaos. I'm Kelly, announced the 12-year-old girl, her chin raised. Defiantly. And I don't need another mother. I've been taking care of everyone just fine. Sarah recognized the defensive posture, the fear hidden beneath the bravado. This child had taken on responsibilities far beyond her years. I'm sure you have, Sarah replied gently. Your father told me how hard you all work to keep the household running. The twins stepped forward then, identical in appearance but clearly different in personality. One hung back shyly while the other studied Sarah with frank curiosity. I'm Nicholas, said the bold one, and that's Robert. He don't talk much to strangers. It's nice to meet you both, Sarah said, crouching to their level. And you don't have to talk to me until you're ready, she added to the shy twin, who rewarded her with a small smile. The youngest child remained in the shadows, clutching a worn rag doll. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of her. She couldn't have been much more than 5, with Roy's dark hair but eyes that seemed far too old for such a young face. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly. The little girl looked to Kenneth, who nodded encouragingly. "That's Lauren," he said. "She don't talk much since Ma died." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. These children had been through so much, had lost so much. The weight of responsibility she was considering felt enormous. But looking at their faces, seeing the mixture of hope and fear, she knew she had already made her choice. The sound of boots on the porch announced Roy's return. He entered carrying a brace of rabbits, his cheeks reddened by the cold. His eyes found Sarah immediately. "I've come to accept your proposal," she said simply. The effect was immediate. Kenneth straightened with relief. Kelly's defiant expression wavered. The twins exchanged glances, and little Lauren took a small step forward. Roy set down the rabbits and removed his hat. "Are you certain? There's no shame in changing your mind." "I'm certain," Sarah replied, and she was surprised to find that she meant it completely. The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church at the base of the mountain. It was a simple ceremony attended only by the children and the preacher. Sarah wore her best dress, the blue wool she had married James in. Roy wore a clean shirt and his only suit, and when he took her hand to place the ring on her finger, his touch was gentle and sure. "Do you, Roy Thompson, take Sarah Roberts to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Roy said, his voice steady and clear. "And do you, Sarah Roberts, take Roy Thompson to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sarah looked into Roy's eyes and saw kindness there, and strength, and the promise of protection. "I do," she said. The kiss that sealed their reunion was brief and chaste, but Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might grow into love given time and care. That first night as a married woman was awkward and uncertain. Roy had given her the small room that had belonged to his first wife, and she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow would bring. She must have dozed because she was awakened by a soft sound from the main room. Rising quietly, she crept to her door and peered out. Little Lauren stood by the dying fire, her rag doll clutched tightly in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, Sarah moved into the room and knelt beside the child. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lauren looked up at her with those two old eyes. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I miss my mama." Sarah's heart broke for this little girl who had lost so much. "I know you do," she said softly, "and that's okay. You should miss her. She was your mama, and she loved you very much." "Are you going to be my mama now?" Lauren asked, her voice trembling. Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I'm going to try to take care of you the way a mama would," she said finally, "but I can't replace your real mama. No one could do that." Lauren studied her face in the firelight, then slowly extended her rag doll. "This was Mama's when she was little. Papa gave it to me when she went to heaven." Sarah accepted the precious offering with a reverence. "She's beautiful," she said. "What's her name?" "Rose," Lauren whispered, "like the flowers Mama used to grow." "Rose is a lovely name," Sarah said, gently smoothing the doll's worn hair. "Would you like me to help you take care of her?" Lauren nodded, and for the first time since Sarah had arrived, she smiled. It was small, tentative, and fragile, but it was a beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and discovery. Sarah threw herself into her new role with determination that surprised even her. She mended clothes and cooked meals and listened to the children's stories. She learned that Kenneth carried the weight of being the man of the house, that Kelly was fiercely protective but desperately missed having someone to confide in, that the twins were as different as night and day despite their identical faces, and that little Lauren was slowly emerging from the shell of grief. Roy watched these developments with quiet approval, never interfering but always supportive. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes about his character. Sarah began to understand why his children respected him so completely. The test of their new family arrangement came sooner than expected. A week after the wedding, Marcus Webb returned with a larger group of men and an official-looking document. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as they approached, her heart sinking. "Thompson," Webb called out, "we need to talk." Roy emerged from the barn, his movements unhurried despite the obvious threat. Sarah could see Kenneth and Kelly positioning themselves near the cabin door. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Roy asked politely. Webb held up the document. Got a court order here. Says the widow Roberts owes money to half the town. And since she can't pay, we're authorized to seize her property and belongings. Mrs. Thompson, Roy corrected quietly, and I believe you'll find that her debts were settled yesterday. Sarah's breath caught. Settled? How could that be possible? Webb's face darkened. That's impossible. We're talking about more than $200. Check with the bank in town, Roy said calmly. You'll find that all of Mrs. Thompson's debts have been paid in full, along with interest. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Webb looked as though he wanted to argue further, but the legal ground had shifted beneath his feet. This ain't over, Thompson, he said finally, but his words lacked conviction. Yes, Roy replied quietly. It is. After the men left, Sarah confronted Roy within the barn. How? She asked simply. Roy continued working on the harness he was mending. I had some money put aside. Seemed like a good use for it. $200 isn't some money put aside, Sarah protested. That's a fortune. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? Roy set down his tools and looked at her directly. Because you are my wife now. Because those children in there need you, and you can't take proper care of them if you're constantly looking over your shoulder. But the money was mine to spend as I saw fit, Roy interrupted gently, and I can't think of a better investment than the peace of mind of my family. Family. The word hit Sarah with unexpected force. In the space of a week, she had gone from being alone in the world to being part of something larger. Winter deepened around them, but inside the Thompson cabin, warmth grew in ways that had nothing to do with the fire. Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of family life with surprising ease. She taught Kelly how to braid her hair and listened to her dreams of someday seeing the big cities. She helped the twins with their lessons, marveling at how Nicholas's bold personality complemented Robert's thoughtful nature. She spent quiet hours with little Lauren, slowly coaxing more words and smiles from the grieving child. And Kenneth began to relax into being a 15-year-old boy again. Sarah watched him playing in the snow with his younger siblings and felt fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. These children had become hers in ways she had never expected. Her relationship with Roy evolved more slowly, built on small kindnesses and shared responsibilities rather than grand gestures. He was unfailingly courteous, always considerate of her feelings and opinions. When she suggested changes to the household routine, he listened thoughtfully and usually agreed. When she worried about the children, he offered quiet reassurance and practical solutions. It wasn't the passionate love she had shared with James, but it was something solid and dependable, something she could build a life upon. And sometimes when she caught Roy watching her with the children, she saw something in his eyes that made her think that perhaps, in time, it could become something more. The turning point came on a bitter February night when little Lauren fell ill with a high fever. Sarah sat by her bedside through the long, dark hours, bathing the child's burning forehead and whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since James's death. Roy appeared periodically, bringing fresh water, or simply sitting quietly in the chair beside the bed. Near dawn, Lauren's fever finally broke, and she opened her eyes to find Sarah leaning over her, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Mama?" Lauren whispered, her voice weak but clear. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "I'm here, sweetheart, I'm here." And in that moment, something fundamental shifted. Lauren had called her Mama, not because she was trying to replace the mother she had lost, but because Sarah had earned the title through love and care and sleepless nights of worry. Roy, who had witnessed the exchange from the doorway, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You saved her," he said quietly. "We saved her," Sarah corrected, looking up at him with new understanding. "We're a team now, aren't we?" Roy's smile was soft and genuine. "Yes," he said, "we are." Spring came early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility. Sarah planted a garden behind the cabin, teaching Kelly and Lauren about herbs and vegetables while the boys helped Roy with the heavier work. The family had found its rhythm, each member contributing their unique strengths to the whole. It was during this time of growing contentment that trouble arrived in an unexpected form. A well-dressed woman appeared at their door one morning, claiming to be Roy's sister-in-law, the sister of his deceased first wife. Sarah had never heard Roy mention any relatives, and his reaction to the woman's arrival was notably cool. Margaret, he said, his voice carefully neutral. What brings you here? Margaret's eyes swept over Sarah with barely concealed disdain before settling on the children who had gathered curiously around the doorway. I've come for the children, Roy. It's time they had proper care, proper education. I'm prepared to take them back east with me. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Take the children? Her children? The very thought was unbearable. The children are fine where they are, Roy said firmly. They have a mother now, a good home. They don't need rescuing. Margaret's laugh was sharp and bitter. A mother, this woman? She gestured dismissively at Sarah. She's nothing but a desperate widow you married out of convenience. These children deserve better. Sarah felt each word like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Kelly stepped forward, her young face blazing with indignation. Sarah is our mother, she said fiercely. She takes care of us and loves us, and she belongs here with us. You don't know anything about our family. Kenneth moved to stand beside his sister, his jaw set in a way that reminded Sarah powerfully of his father. We don't want to go anywhere, he said quietly. This is our home. The twins flanked their older siblings, and little Lauren ran to Sarah, wrapping her small arms around Sarah's waist in a gesture of absolute trust and loyalty. The message was clear. The children had chosen their side. Margaret's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You've turned them against me, against their own family. No, Roy said, his voice carrying a steel edge. I've given them something you never could, a real family built on love and choice, not obligation and guilt. The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment a new voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Sarah turned to see Sheriff Collins approaching the cabin. She had never been so glad to see a lawman in her life. Sheriff, Roy said, nodding respectfully, Mrs. Hartwell here seems to have some concerns about my children's welfare. Sheriff Collins looked from Margaret to Roy to the children clustered protectively around Sarah. His experienced eyes took in the scene quickly. Ma'am, he said to Margaret, touching the brim of his hat politely, I hope you're not planning to cause any trouble for the Thompson family. They're well regarded in these parts. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. I'm simply concerned about my late sister's children. I can understand concern, the sheriff replied evenly, but I can also see that these children are well cared for, well fed, and clearly happy where they are. Unless you have some legal claim to custody, I'd suggest you respect their father's wishes. The legal reality seemed to dawn on Margaret then. She had no claim on the children beyond sentiment and disapproval. Roy was their father, Sarah was now legally their stepmother, and the children themselves had made their preferences clear. This isn't over, Margaret said, but her words lacked conviction. Yes, Roy said quietly, it is. After Margaret's departure, the family drew closer together, united by the threat they had faced and overcome. Sarah found herself marveling at how fiercely the children had defended her, how completely they had accepted her as their mother. That evening, as Sarah tucked Lauren into bed, the little girl looked up at her with serious eyes. Are you going to leave us, Mama? Sarah's heart clenched at the fear she heard in that small voice. Never, she said firmly. I'm your mama now, and mamas don't leave their children. Not ever. Lauren smiled and closed her eyes, finally secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted and safe. Sarah kissed her forehead and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected gift of motherhood. Later, as she and Roy sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, he spoke the words that had been building between them for months. I love you, Sarah. She looked at him, this good man who had rescued her from despair and given her a family beyond her wildest dreams. I love you too, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming love of her youth. It was something deeper, more solid, built on respect and shared purpose, and the daily choice to care for each other and their children. It was the kind of love that could weather storms and last a lifetime. Summer brought new challenges and new joys. The gardens Sarah had planted flourished under her careful tending. The children grew taller and stronger, their personalities developing in ways that delighted and sometimes challenged their parents. Kenneth began talking about his plans for the future, dreams that now included staying close to home to help his father with the expanding farm. Kelly discovered a talent for storytelling that kept her younger siblings entranced. The twins developed their individual interests, Nicholas drawn to the mechanical aspects of farm work, while Robert showed an aptitude for reading that suggested he might become a teacher someday. And Lauren blossomed into a confident, happy child who chattered constantly and brought joy to everyone around her. Sarah's relationship with Roy deepened as well, built on the foundation of shared responsibility and mutual respect they had established. They worked together seamlessly, whether dealing with the daily challenges of raising 6 children or planning for the family's future. Sarah found herself consulting Roy on decisions both large and small, valuing his steady judgment and practical wisdom. In turn, he sought her opinion on matters ranging from the children's education to improvements needed around the homestead. The physical aspect of their marriage developed gradually, naturally, without urgency, but with a tenderness that was perhaps more precious for being freely chosen. Roy was patient and gentle, never demanding more than Sarah was ready to give. And she found herself falling deeper in love with this man who had shown her that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as practical arrangements. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Sarah reflected on the dramatic changes the past year had brought to her life. 12 months ago, she had been a desperate widow facing an uncertain future, convinced that her inability to bear children meant she would never know the joy of motherhood. Now she was the beloved wife of a good man and the cherished mother of 6 wonderful children who had chosen to love her as completely as if she had given birth to them herself. The irony wasn't lost on her that her perceived weakness, her barrenness, had actually prepared her perfectly for the role she now filled. She had no biological children to favor, no divided loyalties. All 6 of Roy's children were equally hers, equally loved, equally cherished. Her childlessness, which had once seemed like such a curse, had become the very thing that made her the perfect mother for this particular family. As winter settled over the mountains once again, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been a woman defined by what she lacked. No husband, no children, no prospects, no hope. Now she was defined by abundance. A loving husband, 6 children who called her mama, a home filled with laughter and warmth, and a future bright with possibility. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. There were still moments when she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for so many people, times when she wondered if she was doing enough, being enough, giving enough. But those moments were increasingly rare, overshadowed by the daily joys of family life and the deep satisfaction of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The children continued to grow and change, each developing their own unique personality and interests. Kenneth had grown into a young man any parent would be proud of, responsible and kind, but with enough spirit to keep life interesting. Kelly had blossomed into a confident young woman who spoke her mind and stood up for what she believed in. The twins had developed into distinct individuals while maintaining their close bond, Nicholas with his mechanical aptitude and Robert with his love of learning. And Lauren had grown from a grieving, silent child into a happy, talkative little girl who brought joy to everyone around her. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in Sarah herself. The woman who had once believed herself incomplete because she couldn't bear children had become the mother of 6, loved and needed and cherished by each of them. The woman who had thought her life was over at 28 had discovered that it was actually just beginning. One evening in late February, as Sarah helped Lauren with her letters while the older children worked on their own studies around the kitchen table, Roy entered from outside, stamping snow off his boots. "Storm's getting worse out there," he announced. "Looks like we might be snowed in for a few days." The children greeted this news with excitement rather than concern. Being snowed in meant extra time together as a family, games by the fire, and the cozy intimacy that came from being safe and warm while the world outside raged. "I'll make sure we have plenty of firewood brought in," Kenneth said, already reaching for his coat. "I'll help," Nicholas added, while Robert gathered up his books to make room for the wood they would stack by the hearth. Sarah watched her family spring into action, each member knowing their role and fulfilling it without complaint. This was what she had dreamed of during those lonely years. Not just children, but a real family working together, caring for each other, finding joy in simple shared experiences. As the storm raged outside for the next 3 days, the Thompson family created their own warmth inside. They played games, told stories, worked on projects that had been put aside during busier times. Sarah taught Kelly and Lauren how to embroider, while Roy worked with the boys on repairing harnesses and tools. In the evenings, they gathered around the fire while Roy read aloud from one of their precious books, his deep voice bringing adventure stories to life for his captivated audience. It was during one of these reading sessions that Lauren climbed into Sarah's lap and whispered, "Mama, will you tell us about when you were little?" Sarah's first instinct was to deflect. Her childhood had not been particularly happy, marked by poverty and the early loss of her own parents. But looking into Lauren's trusting face, she realized that her daughter genuinely wanted to know about her past. "What would you like to know, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly. "Did you always want to be a mama?" Kelly asked, looking up from her embroidery. The question struck Sarah like a physical blow, but she forced herself to answer honestly. "Yes, I did, more than anything in the world." "But you couldn't have babies," Lauren said matter-of-factly, with the casual directness of childhood. "No, I couldn't," Sarah confirmed, her voice steady despite the old pain. Kenneth looked up from the harness he was mending. "But you got to be our mama instead. That's even better, isn't it? Because you chose us and we chose you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the wisdom in her oldest son's words. "Yes," she said softly. "It is better because love that's chosen is sometimes stronger than love that just happens by accident." Roy's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw in them the same understanding that had grown between them over the months and years of their marriage. They had all chosen each other, created their family through deliberate acts of love and commitment rather than mere biological chance. "Tell us about when you first met Papa," Nicholas urged, and Sarah found herself sharing the story of that terrifying night when Roy had appeared like a guardian angel to protect her from Marcus Webb and his men. As she spoke, she realized that she was giving her children something precious, the story of how their family had come to be, the tale of how love had triumphed over fear and loneliness and uncertainty. It was their origin story, as important to them as any fairy tale or adventure novel. When the storm finally passed and they could venture outside again, Sarah was almost sorry to see it end. Those 3 days of enforced togetherness had strengthened the bonds between all of them, creating memories that would last a lifetime. As the years continued to pass, the Thompson family faced the normal challenges and celebrations that come with raising children. There were illnesses and arguments and financial concerns, but through it all, they faced everything together as a unit, drawing strength from their bonds with each other. Kenneth grew into a fine young man who chose to stay close to home, establishing his own farm on land adjacent to his father's property. His wedding to a sweet local girl was a celebration that brought the entire community together, and Sarah felt immense pride as she watched her eldest son begin his own family. Kelly surprised everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher, a decision that required her to attend school in the city for 2 years. Sarah worried about letting her daughter go so far from home, but Roy reminded her that they had raised Kelly to be strong and independent. "We can't keep them with us forever," he said gently. "The best gift we can give them is the confidence to build their own lives." The twins chose different paths as they came of age. Nicholas followed his mechanical interests, apprenticing with a blacksmith in town. Robert, true to his scholarly nature, became the assistant to the local doctor, learning medicine and talking about someday attending medical college. And Lauren grew into a confident, loving young woman who seemed to embody the best qualities of all her siblings. She was Kenneth's steadiness, Kelly's determination, Nicholas's practical skills, and Robert's compassion, all wrapped up in a sunny disposition. Through all these changes, Sarah and Roy's marriage continued to deepen and strengthen. They had learned to work together seamlessly, always emerging stronger and more united from whatever challenges they faced. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Roy spoke words that had been in both their hearts for years. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard about your situation that night? If I hadn't decided to ride up here and make my crazy proposal?" Sarah considered the question, trying to imagine a different life, a different path. "I try not to think about it too much," she admitted. "It's too frightening to contemplate. I might have lost everything that matters most to me." "Or you might have found a different kind of happiness," Roy suggested. You're a strong woman, Sarah. You would have survived, found a way to build a good life. Maybe, Sarah agreed, but it wouldn't have been this life. It wouldn't have been our children, our family, our love, and I can't imagine anything better than what we have. Roy reached for her hand, a gesture that still sent warmth through her entire body even after all these years. I used to think that losing Mary was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, and it was terrible, devastating. But if she hadn't died, I never would have met you. I never would have known this kind of love, this kind of partnership. Sarah understood what he meant. Her first marriage to James had been good, built on young love and shared dreams. But this marriage was different, deeper, more complex. It was built on choice and commitment, on the daily decision to love and support each other through whatever life brought their way. Do you think the children know, she asked, how much we love each other, how grateful we are for the family we've created together? I think they know, Roy replied. I think they see it in the way we treat each other, the way we work together, the way we've never wavered in our commitment to them or to each other. As if summoned by their conversation, Lauren appeared on the porch, now a young woman of 19, but still their baby in many ways. What are you two talking about so seriously? She asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah. Just reflecting on how blessed we are, Sarah replied, reaching out to smooth her daughter's hair in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. Lauren smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. I was just thinking the same thing. I was in town today, and I ran into Mrs. Patterson from the general store. She was telling me about her daughter who moved to California, how she never writes, never visits, and I thought about how lucky we are, how close our family is. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, when I was young, I thought family was something that just happened to you, something you were born into and had no control over. But our family has taught me that the best families are the ones you choose, the ones you build through love and commitment and daily acts of care. Lauren nodded enthusiastically. That's what I tell people when they ask about you being our stepmother. I tell them that you're not our step anything. You're just our mother. Plain and simple. The woman who raised us and loved us and made our house a home. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at her daughter's words. After all these years, she still sometimes marveled at the completeness of her children's acceptance, the wholehearted way they had embraced her as their mother. And what do you tell them about Roy? She asked, glancing at her husband with a smile. I tell them that Papa is the smartest man who ever lived, Lauren replied promptly, because he had the sense to marry you and give us the best mother in the world. Roy chuckled, but Sarah could see the emotion in his eyes. Your daughter has excellent judgment, he said to Sarah. Our daughter, Sarah corrected gently, and Roy's smile deepened. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but united by the bonds of love and family that had sustained them through so many years. Sarah thought about the woman she had been when Roy first appeared at her cabin door, desperate, frightened, convinced that her life was over because she couldn't fulfill what she saw as her primary purpose as a woman. That woman could never have imagined the life she was living now, the depth of love and satisfaction and purpose she had found in this unexpected family. She thought about the children who had become hers through choice rather than birth, each one a unique gift that had enriched her life in ways she was still discovering. They had taught her that motherhood wasn't about biology, it was about love, commitment, and the willingness to put another person's needs before your own. And she thought about Roy, the man who had seen potential in a desperate situation and had the courage to act on it. He had given her not just protection and security, but partnership, love, and the chance to become the woman she was meant to be. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and with them came the inevitable changes that mark the passage of time in any family. Kelly returned from the city with her teaching certificate and established the school she had dreamed of. Her wedding to a young lawyer from town was a joyous celebration that filled Sarah's heart with pride and happiness. Nicholas opened his own blacksmith shop and quickly became known throughout the region for his skill and reliability. Robert fulfilled his dream of becoming a doctor, studying in the city, but returning to serve the people of his mountain community. And Lauren surprised everyone by falling in love with a traveling preacher who shared her compassionate nature and her desire to help others. Their wedding was held in the little church where Sarah and Roy had married so many years earlier, bringing their story full circle. Through all these changes, Sarah and Roy remained the steady center around which their family revolved. Their home became the gathering place for holidays and celebrations, the refuge where their children and grandchildren came for comfort and advice. One autumn evening, as Sarah sat on the porch watching her grandchildren play in the yard while their parents visited inside, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The desperate widow who had once believed her life was over had become the beloved grandmother of a dozen children, the cornerstone of a family that spanned multiple generations. Roy emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, settling into his favorite chair beside her. At 62, he was still strong and vital, though his hair was now completely silver, and lines of laughter and wisdom marked his weathered face. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, using the same phrase that had become a ritual between them over the years. "Just thinking about time," Sarah replied, accepting her coffee with a smile of thanks. "How it changes everything and nothing all at once." Roy nodded, understanding her meaning without need for elaboration. "The children are all grown and gone, but they're still our children. The house is quieter, but it's still full of love." "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked. "The chaos of having 6 children underfoot all the time?" Roy considered the question carefully. "I miss some of it," he admitted. "I miss the bedtime stories and the Christmas mornings when they were small, but I don't miss the worry, the constant concern about whether we were doing right by them." Sarah smiled. "And now we get to watch them raise their own children, make their own mistakes, find their own happiness. And we get to be grandparents," Roy added with a grin. "All the joy of children without the full-time responsibility." As if to illustrate his point, one of Kenneth's boys came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Grandma Sarah, Grandpa Roy, look what I found." He held up a perfectly shaped pine cone, as proud as if he had discovered buried treasure. Sarah leaned down to examine his find with appropriate seriousness. "That's a beautiful pine cone, sweetheart. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to give it to Mama for her collection," the boy announced before running back to rejoin his cousins in their play. "That's what I love most about this stage of our lives," Sarah said softly. "We get to see our children as parents, watch them pass on the values we tried to teach them. And we get to see that we did a good job," Roy added. "All 6 of our children have become good people, loving parents, valuable members of their community. That's not luck, Sarah. That's the result of the love and care you poured into them every single day." Sarah felt the familiar warmth of gratitude wash over her. "We poured into them," she corrected. "We were partners in raising them, just like we've been partners in everything else." As the evening grew cooler and the grandchildren were called inside by their parents, Sarah and Roy remained on the porch, reluctant to end this peaceful moment. The mountains around them were painted in shades of gold and crimson by the setting sun, the same mountains that had seemed so forbidding when Sarah first arrived as a frightened widow. "Do you ever think about what we'll be remembered for?" Sarah asked. Roy was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "I think we'll be remembered as the couple who proved that love can overcome almost anything, that families can be built on choice as well as blood, that sometimes the most practical decisions can lead to the most beautiful outcomes." "I hope we'll be remembered as good parents," Sarah said, "as people who loved our children enough to let them find their own paths while always being there when they needed us." "We will be," Roy assured her. "But more than that, I think we'll be remembered as people who found each other when we both needed finding, who built something lasting and beautiful from what seemed like impossible circumstances." Sarah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For believing that a barren widow could become a good mother to your children. For giving me the chance to discover who I really was." Roy's grip on her hand tightened. "You don't need to thank me for that. You gave me just as much. You took my broken family and made it whole again. You gave my children the mother they desperately needed. You gave me a love I never expected to find again." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each lost in their own memories of the years they had shared. Sarah thought about the woman she had been at 28, convinced that her inability to bear children meant she would never know the joy of motherhood. That woman could never have imagined the depth of maternal love she would experience. She thought about the early days of their marriage, the careful politeness that had gradually given way to genuine affection and eventually to deep, abiding love. She remembered the first time Roy had told her he loved her, the first time she had felt truly secure in her place in his heart and in his family. "What are you thinking about now?" Roy asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just grateful," Sarah replied simply. "Grateful for all of it. The struggles and the joys, the fears and the triumphs. All of it led us here, to this moment, to this life we've built together." Roy smiled, the expression visible even in the dim light from the house. "I'm grateful too. Grateful that I had the courage to make that crazy proposal all those years ago. Grateful that you had the courage to accept it." "It wasn't courage," Sarah said with a laugh. "It was desperation." "Maybe it started as desperation," Roy agreed. "But it became courage. The courage to love children who weren't your own, to build a life with a man you barely knew, to trust that everything would work out somehow." "And it did work out," Sarah marveled. "Better than I ever dared to hope." As they finally prepared to go inside for the night, Sarah took one last look at the mountains that surrounded their home. The same peaks that had once seemed like prison walls now looked like protective guardians, sheltering the family that had grown and flourished in their shadow. When they finally settled into bed, Sarah curled against Roy's side in a position that had become as natural as breathing. "Roy," she said softly in the darkness. "Yes?" "If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything?" Roy was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might have fallen asleep. But finally his voice came through the darkness, warm with certainty. "Not a single thing," he said. "Every choice we made, every challenge we faced, every joy we shared, it all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Sarah smiled in the darkness, her heart full of contentment and love. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." Years continued to flow like water over the mountain stones, each season bringing its own gifts and challenges to the Thompson family. Sarah and Roy aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond strengthened by decades of shared experience and mutual support. The grandchildren they had watched play in their yard grew into young adults with dreams and ambitions of their own. Some followed paths that kept them close to the mountain community where they had been born, while others ventured out into the wider world, carrying with them the values and love that had been instilled in them by their parents and grandparents. Sarah, now in her 70s, had become something of a legend in their small community. People spoke with reverence about the woman who had married Roy Thompson and transformed his grieving household into one of the most loving and stable families anyone had ever known. Young mothers sought her advice about raising children, and her wisdom, born of decades of experience and deep love, was treasured by all who received it. Roy, despite his advancing years, remained active and engaged, still working the land he loved and serving as an unofficial patriarch to not just his own family, but to much of the surrounding community. His quiet strength and steady wisdom had guided countless people through difficult times, and his reputation for fairness and integrity was unquestioned. One spring morning, as Sarah worked in the garden that had been her pride and joy for so many years, she was surprised to see a familiar figure approaching up the mountain path. It took her a moment to recognize the woman, but when she did, her breath caught in her throat. Margaret Hartwell, Roy's former sister-in-law, now walked with the aid of a cane, her once proud bearing bent by age and, Sarah suspected, by years of bitterness and regret. She looked nothing like the imperious woman who had tried to take the Thompson children away so many decades ago. "Mrs. Thompson," Margaret said quietly as she reached the garden gate, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." Sarah straightened slowly, her own movements not as fluid as they once had been, but her eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Mrs. Hartwell, it's been many years." "Too many," Margaret replied, and Sarah was surprised to hear genuine regret in her voice. "I've come to apologize and to ask your forgiveness for the pain I caused your family." Sarah studied the older woman's face, seeing in it the weight of years and the burden of choices that had brought her nothing but loneliness and regret. "Would you like to come in for some tea?" she asked finally. Margaret's eyes filled with tears at the kindness in Sarah's voice. "I would be grateful for that." As they sat in Sarah's kitchen, the same room where she had fed and nurtured 6 children through their growing years, Margaret told her story. She spoke of the years of loneliness after her failed attempt to gain custody of the Thompson children, of the gradual realization that she had been motivated not by love for her late sister's children, but by her own need to feel important and needed. I convinced myself that I was acting in their best interests, Margaret had said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the truth was, I was jealous. Jealous of the love they had for you, jealous of the family you had built with Roy. Sarah listened without judgment, her heart aching for this woman who had spent so many years isolated by her own pride and poor choices. What changed your mind? She asked gently. Margaret smiled sadly. Time, and seeing the kind of adults those children became. I've watched from a distance over the years, seen Kenneth become a successful farmer and devoted father, seen Kelly establish her school and touch so many young lives, seen all of them become exactly the kind of people any parent would be proud to claim. She paused, wiping tears from her weathered cheeks. I realized that you had given them something I never could have: unconditional love, stability, and the freedom to become themselves. You were exactly the mother they needed, and I was a fool to think otherwise. Sarah reached across the table and took Margaret's hand in hers. We all make mistakes, she said softly. What matters is that we learn from them. Have you ever regretted it? Margaret asked suddenly. Taking on 6 children who weren't your own, giving up the chance for a different kind of life? Sarah smiled, thinking of all the years of joy and love and purpose that had filled her life since that desperate night when Roy had first appeared at her door. Never, she said firmly. Those children gave me everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dared to dream of. They made me a mother in the truest sense of the word. Margaret nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I can see that. I can see it in the way they still come to you, still seek your counsel, still light up when they talk about you. You gave them roots and wings, and that's the greatest gift any parent can give. Margaret's visit lasted 3 days, during which time all of the Thompson children came to see her, some bringing their own children and grandchildren. It was a healing time for everyone involved, a chance to put old hurts to rest and to celebrate the family that had emerged stronger from the challenges they had faced. On the morning of Margaret's departure, she stood on the porch with Sarah and Roy, looking out at the mountains that surrounded their home. You built something beautiful here, she said quietly. Something I was too blind to see at the time. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. After Margaret left, Sarah and Roy sat together on their porch, reflecting on the unexpected reconciliation they had just witnessed. Do you think she'll find peace now? Sarah asked. I hope so, Roy replied. Everyone deserves the chance to make amends for their mistakes. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Sarah found herself thinking about forgiveness and the power it had to heal old wounds. Margaret's visit had reminded her of how blessed she had been, how many gifts had come from what had initially seemed like desperate circumstances. Roy, she said as they settled into bed together, do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if we hadn't found each other? Roy turned to face her in the darkness, his hand finding hers under the covers. Sometimes, he admitted, but not with regret. More with gratitude that we did find each other, that we had the courage to take a chance on love. Even when it started as a practical arrangement, Sarah asked with a smile in her voice. Especially because it started as a practical arrangement, Roy replied, it means we chose each other for all the right reasons: compatibility, shared values, mutual respect. The passionate love came later, built on that solid foundation. Sarah squeezed his hand, marveling at how, even after all these years, his touch could still comfort and reassure her. I love you, she said simply. And I love you, he replied. More than I ever thought possible when I made that crazy proposal so many years ago. As they drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last conscious thought was of gratitude for the man beside her, for the children who had made her a mother, for the life they had built together from the ashes of loss and despair. She had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as desperate circumstances, and that love chosen was often stronger than love that simply happened by chance. As Sarah entered her 80s, she began to feel the weight of her years more keenly. Her steps were slower, her hands less steady, but her mind remained sharp and her heart as full of love as ever. Roy, now in his mid-80s, remained devoted and attentive, still the steady presence he had been throughout their long marriage. Their roles in the family had evolved once again. No longer the active patriarch and matriarch, they had become the revered elders, the keepers of family history and wisdom. Their great-grandchildren gathered around them with the same eager attention their own children had shown decades earlier, hungry for stories and guidance. One particularly meaningful evening, as three generations of Thompsons gathered in the familiar kitchen for Sunday dinner, Sarah found herself surrounded by the fruits of her unexpected motherhood. Kenneth, now in his 60s, still bore the steady reliability that had marked him as a teenager. Kelly, a grandmother herself, continued to influence young lives through her teaching. The twins, Nicholas and Robert, had become pillars of their community, and Lauren, fully recovered and glowing with health, had dedicated her life to helping others through her husband's ministry. "Grandma Sarah," one of the great-grandchildren asked, "will you tell us about when you first came to live with Grandpa Roy?" Sarah smiled, looking around the table at the faces that represented the legacy of love she and Roy had built together. "Well," she began, her voice still strong despite her years, "it was a very different time, and I was a very different woman." As she told the familiar story, Sarah marveled at how the telling had evolved over the years. What had once been a tale of desperation and practical necessity had become a love story, a testament to the power of choice and commitment to create something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. When the story was finished and the family had dispersed to their own homes, Sarah and Roy sat together in their quiet house, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime. "Do you think we did well?" Sarah asked, a question that had taken on new urgency as they both felt the approach of their final years. Roy reached for her hand, his grip still firm despite his age. "Look around you," he said softly. "6 children who became good people, dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry our values forward. A community that's better because of the love we shared. I'd say we did very well indeed." Sarah nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. "I never imagined that night when you first appeared at my door that we would build all of this." "Neither did I," Roy admitted. "I thought I was proposing a practical arrangement that would solve both our problems. I had no idea I was proposing a love story." As winter settled over the mountains once more, Sarah and Roy found themselves spending more time quietly together, content with each other's company and the peaceful rhythm of their days. They read together, shared meals, and watched the snow fall outside their windows, secure in the knowledge that they were surrounded by love. It was during this peaceful time that Roy began to fail. Not dramatically, but gradually, the way mountain snow melts in spring. He tired more easily, moved more slowly, spoke less frequently. Sarah, despite her own frailty, became his devoted caregiver, just as he had been hers through various illnesses over the years. "I'm not ready to leave you," Roy said one evening as they sat by the fire, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "I'm not ready to let you go either. But we both know that love doesn't end with death. What we've built together, what we've given to our children, that will continue long after we're gone." Roy smiled, the expression lighting up his weathered face. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. Promise me you'll remember the good times. Promise me you'll know that every day with you was a gift, that you made my life complete in ways I never thought possible." Sarah leaned over and kissed his forehead, tasting the salt of her own tears. "I promise," she whispered, "and you promise me the same thing. Promise me you'll remember that you saved me, that you gave me everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dared to dream of." "I promise," Roy replied, his hand tightening around hers one last time. Roy passed peacefully in his sleep 3 nights later, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, with Sarah holding his hand. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the decades, a testament to the kind of man he had been and the legacy he left behind. In the days that followed, Sarah was sustained by the love of her family and the memories of a lifetime spent with a man who had shown her what true partnership looked like. The grief was profound, but it was tempered by gratitude for the years they had shared and the knowledge that their love had created something lasting and beautiful. Sarah lived for 3 more years after Roy's death, years filled with the love of her children and grandchildren, years spent sharing the story of how a practical arrangement had become one of the great love stories of their community. She died peacefully on a spring morning, surrounded by flowers from the garden she had tended for so many decades, with Lauren holding her hand just as she had held Roy's. Her last words were of gratitude, gratitude for the life she had been given, for the children who had made her a mother, for the man who had seen potential in a desperate widow and had the courage to act on it. The funeral of Sarah Thompson was a celebration of a life well lived and a love that had touched countless people. The church was filled to overflowing with family members, friends, and community members who had been influenced by her kindness, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to family. Kenneth, now the family patriarch, delivered the eulogy with the same steady strength that had marked him throughout his life. Our mother, he began, and the word mother carried no qualification, no acknowledgement that she had not given birth to them, taught us that families are built not just on blood, but on choice. She chose to love us when she didn't have to, chose to stay when she could have left, chose to see potential in 6 grieving children when others might have seen only problems. Years passed, and the Thompson family story became part of the local folklore, told and retold by community members who had witnessed the transformation of a desperate widow into one of the most beloved matriarchs in the region's history. The tale took on different nuances with each telling, but the core message remained constant, that love chosen is often stronger than love that simply happens, and that families can be built on commitment and choice as surely as on blood and biology. The local historical society eventually created a small exhibit about the Thompson family, featuring photographs, letters, and artifacts that told the story of how a desperate widow and a grieving widower had created something beautiful from the most unlikely circumstances. School children would visit the exhibit and learn about the power of choice, commitment, and love to overcome even the most daunting challenges. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Sarah and Roy Thompson was not found in any museum or historical display. It was found in the lives of their descendants, in the values they carried forward, in the way they approached their own relationships and families. Kenneth's grandson would tell colleagues about his great-grandmother, who had taught him that success was measured not in wealth or status, but in the love and respect of family and community. Kelly's great-granddaughter, a teacher like her ancestor, would share with her students the story of a woman who had found her greatest purpose in nurturing children who were not biologically her own. The twins' descendants carried forward their great-grandparents' example of partnership and mutual support in their own marriages, understanding that the strongest relationships were built on respect, shared values, and daily choices to love and support each other. Lauren's children and grandchildren continued her legacy of service to others, inspired by the example of a woman who had found meaning and purpose in caring for those in need. And throughout it all, the story continued to inspire others facing their own desperate circumstances. Women who thought their lives were over because of divorce or widowhood would hear about Sarah Thompson and find hope. Men struggling to raise children alone would learn about Roy's practical proposal and consider new possibilities for their families. The little church where Sarah and Roy had married became a popular venue for weddings, with couples drawn by the story of the love that had grown from practical beginnings into something deep and lasting. Ministers would often reference the Thompson story in their ceremonies, reminding couples that the strongest marriages were built not just on passion and romance, but on commitment, respect, and the daily choice to love and support each other. As the decades passed and the original participants in the story passed into legend, new chapters continued to be written. A great-great-granddaughter of Sarah and Roy would write a book about their story, bringing it to a wider audience and inspiring readers around the world with the message that love can triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. The homestead itself would eventually be donated to the state as a historic site, preserved for future generations to visit and learn from. The garden that Sarah had tended so lovingly would be maintained by volunteers, many of them descendants of the original family, ensuring that flowers would continue to bloom each spring as a living memorial to a woman who had found beauty and purpose in the most unlikely circumstances. But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Sarah and Roy Thompson was not made of stone or bronze, but was found in the countless lives that had been touched by their story. Every couple who chose commitment over convenience, every parent who loved a child not born to them, every person who found hope in desperate circumstances, all carried forward the legacy of a practical arrangement that had become a love story for the ages. The mountain peaks that had witnessed the beginning of their story continued to stand sentinel over the valley, unchanged by the passage of time, but somehow enriched by the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars shone bright in the clear mountain air, it seemed that the very landscape held the memory of a desperate widow who had found everything she never dared to dream of, and a grieving widower who had discovered that sometimes the most practical decisions could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. And so the story of the desperate widow and the mountain man with 6 children became part of the eternal human narrative of love found in unexpected places, of families created by choice rather than chance, and of the transformative power of commitment freely given and gratefully received. It was a story that would be told and retold, inspiring hope in the hearts of those who thought their chances for happiness had passed them by, reminding them that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we have the courage to say yes to an unexpected proposal, to choose love over fear, and to believe that even in our darkest moments, the possibility for joy and fulfillment still exists. The mountains stood eternal, the seasons continued their endless cycle, and the love that Sarah and Roy Thompson had built together lived on in the hearts and lives of all who had been touched by their story. A testament to the enduring truth that the greatest families are built not on blood alone, but on the daily choice to love, to care, and to remain committed to each other through all the challenges and joys that life brings.